Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. And once more, dear friends, let us go into the breach. And we're pleased and honored, as always, to be joined by a friend of ours, John Horvat, to talk about what's going on in St. Louis. And for those of you who haven't seen the latest rash in this country of statue toppling, let me give you a little bit of a background, and then we'll kick off the conversation. The statue topplers, they're trying to take down the statue of St. Louis IX, King, by the way, King St. Louis IX. Now that stood in front of Forest Park in St. Louis, Missouri, and the citizens there are rallying to the defense of the good king. And there's a petition right now that has about 50,000 signatures. And we'll make that, we'll post that link when we post this video, so that if you'd like to sign the petition, you can very well do so. And John will give us that information also. So John says we need representative figures like King St. Louis to guide society. Good King St. Louis, quote, is a shining figure of a statesman and leader. I wish we had political leaders like him today. And John's going to explain that a little bit. And John also believes that the riotous monument topplers, well, they represent disorder and destruction that will take society to ruin. And we're going to talk about that because it seems that way. They seek to destroy history and erase the memory of those like St. Louis. And these are the role models that we exactly need. So there, like I said, it is a petition. And John already published a video of St. Louis direct descendant, Prince Bertrand of Orleans Braganza, urging Americans to keep the statue. So, and finally, St. Louis was renowned for his passion for justice, and he was a statesman who pursued peace with the nation surrounding France. He was a father to his people. This is what his descendant, the prince, had to say. So, John Horvat, welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe.
Great to be on the show.
Right.
Always.
Joe, I'm going to kick it over to you, and we'll start with a prayer.
Okie doke. As is our custom, we always start with a prayer because all good things start with a prayer, and this is a good thing. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, before you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Again, John, welcome. John is a friend of the show. He has a great message for all of us today. We're going to talk about all things St. Louis. As we know, one of our great cities in America is named after him. Many cathedrals are named after St. Louis. The one we are affiliated with regard to the city, in the great city of New Orleans, in Jackson Square, St. Louis Cathedral there. We're on the Crusade channel, Mike Church's channel down there. So this is something I think our viewers and listeners are very interested in. So John, I think a good place to begin is why should Americans care about St. Louis?
Well, I think largely because St. Louis was a great leader. He was we need real leaders, and St. Louis was a real leader. It's not only he pretty much showed it could be done, and he was a good statesman. He was virtuous, not only virtuous, but he also loved God. He was not afraid to say he loved God. He was not afraid to say he served the church. I mean, these are the kind of people we need as leaders. These are the kind of people we need to we don't need politicians. We need people like St. Louis, and he shows it can be done. It was done. Here you had a leader, and about I think he was king from about 1240s to 1270, and he was just an amazing leader. I think Americans would like something like that. Also, he was very hands-on. He really took responsibility for everything. When he failed, he took responsibility for it. When he was successful, he was very humble, but he wasn't a pushover. He was a very strong leader. Whenever his realm was being attacked, he could be there to defend it. I think that's why Americans should care about him and see him as an example.
Well, as Catholics, we know that he is a saint, and saints are just that, examples, and they point to Christ. I know a little bit about St. Louis. I know he was also very good to the poor.
Mm.
He was a king, and he was very mindful. Could we talk a little bit about that? Because, I mean, I think sadly, people look at leaders as they just kind of rub shoulders with the elites, and they forget about the common man. I know he was very mindful of the poor when he reigned in France.
Yeah, he said the blessings of the kingdom come through the poor. And so he actually did take care of the poor. He fed beggars at the table, at his own table. He washed their feet. He took care of lepers. He fed he at his daily meals. 100 poor people had the right to come and to eat at his table. So he founded a lot of orphanages and places for the poor, places for houses for just blind. He founded a lot of hospitals and places that help the poor. So from the very beginning, he took care of the poor and took care of them in an amazing way.
Sounds like a really terrible guy.
Yeah.
It sounds like a guy whose statue you really want to tear down and smelt it down and make it into something else. Terrible, terrible guy.
Right. I mean, it doesn't make sense. He does everything that that we so need today. You know, they're talking about needs for justice, need for taking care of the disadvantaged, the things. He did it all. He did it in a way like a saint can do it.
Well, I don't see any of the current politicians who constantly preach to us that they love the poor so much. None of them are inviting the poor into their mansions or on their yachts to come and eat some foie gras and drink some Grey Goose, I guess. So, but I'm sure they'll be the first to criticize good King St. Louis. Go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think there's a difference between a manager and a leader. And I think we have to draw that distinction. Anyone could manage. People manage through violence, economic violence, through power, political power. But then there's a leader. A leader leads from the front. That's why they call him a leader. They set the example. They're the first one there, and they're the last one to leave. I could remember, it was a great example, Sister Prima, who is the third, head of the Missionaries of Charity. I was in their main chapel in Calcutta, and I remember watching her. At the end, they had the novice just basically, had a little ceremony. And she was like, at the end of it, shutting off the lights. Like mindful of the costs, walking around the chapel, shutting off the lights. That's what a leader is. A leader is a servant. Christ was the servant of servants. That's what the Pope is, the servant of servants. And I think that's what's missing in what we're seeing in society today. I think people go into public service with the wrong intention. They're looking to be served as opposed to serve. We have to go into it with the right intention. And sadly, I think a lot of these guys linger a little bit too long. It becomes a career. They lose focus. They lose sight as far as what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Joe, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah, let me just ask you a question real quick. I had a conversation, John. Talk to us a little bit about this. This was a while ago. I guess it was probably about 3-4 years ago. I was at work. One of my more liberal friends I was talking to. And I made a statement. And I said, can you explain to me why a monarch is just inherently undesirable and what makes, let's say, the system we live in automatic or just on its surface desirable? And they didn't have an answer because they said if a tyrant or a king could be a tyrant, but so can a Congress, so can a House and Senate, so can a Supreme Court. Talk a little bit about that, John, because it seems like King St. Louis is coming down in large part, or they want to take him down because, in fact, he was a king, not simply just St. Louis, because he was a king. What's the idea of that? Like, why are monarchs necessarily the worst thing that you could have?
No, I think that is the reason why a lot of people are against monarchy is that they mistake monarchy with absolute monarchy or divine right of kings. I mean, both of these are modern adaptations, modern innovations as far as monarchy is concerned. Very Protestant, actually. The Protestant Reformation brought about the idea of absolute kings and divine right. King St. Louis was what they call an organic monarchy, and he respected the rights of people, of those behind him. His role was to keep the peace. His role was to coordinate society and to do it in a very personal way. And he did. It was amazing in that, sometimes he would go to a city and he would send words saying, well, do I have the right to go through this city without, paying something or doing something, because I respect the rights of the local leaders. The local leaders have the right to do this and do that. And I just want to make sure that their rights are being respected. And also the monarchy saw itself as a family, as the nation, as a family, and he was the father of the people. And since he had an interest in making the realm very prosperous, because he didn't leave 4 or 5 years afterwards, leave people with a mess. He had to pay the consequences of all his acts, and his descendants had to also pay the consequences of their acts. So it was a very natural way of dealing with people. A lot of family relationships, a lot of it was just a different way of dealing with political reality. I mean, it's not to say monarchy is the only way for a government to rule, but it is one of the ways. And the church itself is a monarchy. The Pope is a monarch, is a monarch. So St. Thomas says it's one of the best ways of ruling because of its unity, and unity because it is one. It has that unity, and so the unity helps keep the country together. It has a figurehead, a person who they can rally around. Whereas other ones are all divisive, and everybody's fighting among each others. So you have to consider that, and I think we don't really consider that. And a lot of people yearn for somebody who will, like King St. Louis, who will take care of the country. St. Louis took care of the country, and he took care of it well.
Just for our listeners, we're with John Horvat. He's a friend of the show. He is the author of Return to Order: From a Frenzied Economy to an Organic Christian Society. We encourage all people to get his book. It's a great book. It's a book for our time. So please look into it. John has been on our show a number of times. He makes appearances on a number of venues: Fox News, C-SPAN, the Washington. He's been quoted in the Washington Times. So again, his book is a very, very important book, Return to Order, and we encourage all people to read it and get it. I mean, you guys just answered my question. I guess the American beef with him is simply that he was a king. Is that the beef? Why they want to tear it down? I mean, to be honest, I don't even know what their problem is with St. Louis. Just by hearing what you guys are talking about, that's the problem, that he's just simply was a king.
No, I think the petitions that are going around saying that he was very anti-Islamic. Of course, he was anti-Islamic. There was a crusade going on, and it was pretty much the equivalent of the Cold War at the time. The Muslims were attacking the Christian settlements and pilgrimage places. They'd taken over lands. There was a war going on, and to expect that war was not didn't have violent aspects. It's not a war then. So the one of the counter petitions says, well, it was because he was anti-Islamic. Others, the Black Lives Matter people, saying, well, because he led a crusade in Africa. Well, I mean, it really wasn't. It was in Egypt, and it wasn't necessarily, the Black lives that were being threatened. It was the civilization of Egypt. So I mean, they get it all wrong. Their history is all wrong. But I think it's largely not only because he was a king, but also because he represented Christian civilization. And this whole statue thing is an attack on civilization. It's not an attack on individuals. It's an attack on civilization as such.
I'm not an expert in the Crusades, and I'm not going to pretend that I am, but I think you touched on something. I mean, the Crusades were fought because in many respects and in many European countries, Christian nations were attacked by the Islamic faith. I mean, I just don't understand the beef. I think, again, the history is twisted. It's also historically accurate that Islam has been spread through the sword. This is it's a historic fact. So
Right.
why shouldn't Christian nations defend themselves? See, I don't understand that. That's number one. And again, I'm not going to pretend like I'm a historian and know everything about the Crusades.
But
But I
Joe,
do know.
real quick, just to address that real quick, but you got to remember something. We're talking about historical revisionism, okay? And we're talking about, as we've said John, as we mentioned on our show before, even someone with a not so deep knowledge of, let's say, for argument's sake, European history, but some knowledge of European history knows, Christian Europe, which was Catholic Europe, okay, from the inception of Islam, all right, didn't do anything, never did anything. Islam was founded, Islam was founded, let's say, for argument's sake, just use a round number, around 650 AD. They went through North Africa, the Middle East. They went as far as India. Okay, like Joe said, they brought the sword. Christianity lost three or four of its major centers. Okay, Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem. Okay, later on Constantinople. Okay, yes, Constantinople. The Catholic Church didn't go in there and say, let's go and take everything back. Even as late as, let's say, for argument's sake, 732, when the Muslims came into Spain. Okay, and then into France at the Battle of Tours. I mean, it's always this revisionist history. Oh, the church was so aggressive. No, the church was defending. In fact, if you look at it, by the time of King St. Louis, 400 or 500 years of history of Islamic history had gone by, and the church never did anything to these people. But at some point, the church did defend. Okay, I'm not going to say that we didn't fight the crusade, but it took 400 years before the launch of the first crusade, and people need to get that through their head. Islam was allowed to do it. The Muslim forces went all over the place, and the church didn't do anything. But at one point, they did. But it took 400 years. I call that patience. I don't know what you call it, but I call that being very patient with a very aggressive and violent political system.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they were defensive wars from all points of view. I mean, if they had not stopped them in the Middle East and in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land, they would go to Europe, and they did go to Europe. I mean, Islam went into Turkey and took Constantinople and stood at the gates of Vienna in the as late as the 16th century. So I mean, they definitely had goals that were to conquer and to destroy Christendom, and we're seeing that today with the even today. These aspirations with the reintroduction of the St. Sophia Church in Constantinople, and
Yes.
let's call it Constantinople. They're redoing that. They're calling to mind the imagery of those times and the desire for those times to take over and to expand Islam.
So over there, they're restoring the imagery of the Islamic faith. And here they're tearing down the Catholic faith.
Absolutely.
Sounds like that's what it makes sense.
Yeah. Another thing with this movement, which I don't understand, is they seem to embrace the rights of Islam, when in fact, the Islamic faith do not embrace their platform, which also supports same-sex marriage. I mean, the Islamic faith is not for same-sex marriage. This movement, clearly, that's one of the main tenets. They're trying to destroy the nuclear family, and they support same-sex marriage. Another thing is the Islamic faith is not for abortion. I just don't understand this love affair that, that Christians are bad, Muslims are good. But if you talk to a Muslim, if you went to a Muslim nation and you said, yes, we espouse for two men to get married, I don't think their response would be too favorable. Yet we have King St. Louis is the bad guy because he fought to defend France against the Muslim raiders, and they're the good guy. I just don't get it. It seems to me that they got all their history wrong. Right,
and there is this interconnection, that of all the liberal causes. You have, the liberal causes, the Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQ agenda, and Islam is right in the middle of that as well. So that not only do you have Islam joining them, you have the feminists and everybody joining the Islam. There's an interconnection because the foundation is pretty much the same. Their foundation is the destruction of a moral law and the destruction of Christian civilization. That's what unites them. And so when they get together, they put aside their differences and are able to do what they want to do.
It's funny, I say to Joe all the time, it's like, they do have this coalition, which, as you mentioned, I mean, on its surface, you say, well, this coalition can't go on forever. When you're talking about radical feminists, when you're talking about radical LGBT, and then you're talking about somebody like Linda Sarsour, who's in favor of Sharia law.
Right.
An objective observer has to sit back and say, okay, let's say they win. To use that word, let's say they were to win. Well, then the question is going to be on their side, well, who's going to kill each other first? I mean, because they cannot coexist. No, they like you said, they right now have a common enemy, which you mentioned, Christian civilization. We say, if your common enemy is Western civilization that was built by the Roman Catholic Church, okay, all right, for now, you have your common enemy. But if you win, it'd be very curious. I mean, we'd all be dead, all right, because they're revolutionaries, and unfortunately, or fortunately, because we pray and we go to confession, so we'll go to heaven, all right? But, it'd be interesting to see how that would play out, because I wish people would look at their coalition and really examine this to say, well, how can all of you guys all be on the same page? And at some point, aren't you going to turn on each other? It would be interesting to see how that plays out.
Right. Well, I think more in the more radical areas of that, they would be they pretty much agree on a lot of things. I mean, the superficial aspects, they will disagree, and the radicals tend to be all on the same side and all on the same page, and they tend to radicalize. I think that's what we're seeing today. A lot of the leftists are radicalizing and throwing behind the liberals that have defended them all that time. You had Bezos of Amazon. He saw protesters in front of his house with a guillotine. I mean, he supported every liberal cause. He's done everything for them, but they just simply say that's not enough because he still represents something of capitalism and money and structures and things that they're against.
John, you bring up a very good point. It's something I was talking to my wife about actually this morning over coffee. A lot of people are supporting this movement, but they don't know what it really is about. And the movement does not support them. You have a lot of educated, professional people who say, yes, I'm all for this. When in fact, this movement, as in the founders of it and the people who are at the core of it, they do not support you. You will get thrown into the fire along with the quote unquote Trump supporter. They're not for you. They're for funding the police. They are trained Marxists. This is not my words. Do your research. Marxists are not for elite people that live in $4,000 apartments in New York City, Chicago, and San Francisco. They are also for deconstructing the nuclear family, which is the building block of every society. Those things right there, I don't know how any rational person can support those three things. After looking at what Marxism has done in the 20th century, conservatively speaking, 100 million lives were taken by Marxists. Then you have defunding the police. We're seeing the bad fruit of that in New York City, Chicago, Portland. We're seeing it. The idea simply does not work. Yet you have professional people, educated people, donating money, corporations funneling money into this movement. I just don't get it. I simply don't. I can't grasp it. I can't.
John, do you attribute that at all to white liberal guilt? I mean, just good old-fashioned traditional white liberal guilt.
I would say even more. I mean, it's a moral problem. It's not an economic problem. It doesn't make sense economically, of course, or even politically. But these problems have a much deeper reason behind them. And I think it is largely moral problems that exist inside these people. These people are very immoral people, and so they, by nature, they resent a moral law and any of the structures that would support a moral law. And so they will contribute to the opposite because they say, well, if I can't do this, if I can't do that, I'm against it. And and sometimes they don't even really care that they'll be thrown under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
So many times the left will eat its own, and it is eating its own because and those who are being eaten do so without a lot of reaction or backlash.
Yeah, I wish people would realize, like, a lot of this is just like you said. When you have pure rage in your heart, you don't even know what you're raging against. I think. I mean, especially when you're talking about, just specifically, if you mentioned, let's say, Black Lives Matter, you could say to them, well, what did King St. Louis have to do with African slavery? He preceded African slavery by what, 300 or 400 years?
Yeah.
It's this rage. And it really is scary because, like you said, even though they know at some point there's going to be infighting amongst themselves, they don't care. They truly are rage-filled revolutionaries that tear down Western civilization, tear down the Catholic Church at all costs. And get it straight with this particular issue with St. Louis. Okay, what happened, so people know, maybe you want to expand on this a little bit more, John, is number one, there was some radicals that went there, and there was what was perceived to be some white guys there. Turned out it was a few guys and a 60-year-old white guy praying the rosary. And they tried to couch it in obviously in the race war narrative. And then they realized after they beat the crap out of this guy, no, and then they subsequently went again. And now all of a sudden there was more people there, and what they realized was, no, these aren't white people; they're Catholic. And they were praying the rosary. And my understanding, maybe you can update us in the audience, John, at the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Resinello, being joined by John Horvat, author of Return to Order. Please follow us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube. Maybe you want to expand on that, John, because I think that's a very important distinction to be made. They want to make it about race. The people standing in front of that statue are Roman Catholic. What about that?
I think that there was about 3 weeks ago, there was a major confrontation there at the statue where there were about 50 Catholics, and they were Catholic men, women, and children, and priests praying the rosary and surrounding the statue. And about 150 to 250 radicals came and shouting and screaming obscenities, all sorts of, just horrible demonstration. But they backed down, and because they saw the Catholics were there. And ever since that time, every night, Catholics are going there. I think the Sunday before, last Sunday, there were 400 people there. Every night, people go there around 6 o'clock. They pray the rosary, and there'll be 50, 60 people. And they're going to do this until August 25th, which is the Feast of St. Louis. It seems like the other side, last week, they said they were going to come and cause problems. 20 people came. It was they just simply left. When Catholics stand up with the rosary, I think this is a perfect example. People say, well, this is serious, and they don't want to deal with it because they sense something greater is behind them. And I think Our Lady is behind them and has taken control of this situation.
Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you, but John, I think that's such a very important point, especially for our audience to understand. Don't let them set the narrative. Don't let the radical. Joe and I don't have to talk about groups in particular. It's all the radical left, the violent radical left. Don't let them make this into a race war. It is not a race war. In the case of Christopher Columbus, in the case of recent statues of Jesus and Mary being both desecrated and taken down, okay? And in the case of St. Louis, let's us create the narrative, or not create the narrative, tell the truthful narrative, which is this is Roman Catholics in America, which all people of goodwill should join us in this, by the way, all right? If they value defending, our heritage as a nation. This is Roman Catholics defending Roman Catholic civilization, basically, and our heritage and our patrimony. So I think it's important to not let them set the narrative. Go ahead, Joe.
Now, before we talked a little bit about what we can do. Praying the rosary as Catholics is one thing. I want to backtrack and ask something. I think when you talk about great leaders, a leader first has to know how to serve before he can like serve others. I think that's a fundamental quality of a leader. And St. Louis served God. What I have found is when you have God as your priority, all things in life fall into place. Your relationships with your friends, your relationship with your wife, your relationships at work, your relationship to money, everything falls into place. It's when that relationship is out of whack, when everything gets out of whack, it trickles down. That's something I think our society hasn't figured out. It hasn't figured that out for 2,000 years. That's something that St. Louis understood. You see, many times people just think because he was a powerful man, he was a king, he was a beast. Well, saints come in all shapes and sizes, in all segments of society. He just happened to be a king. We could look at Elizabeth of Hungary. We could look at St. Bridget from Sweden. These were people who were very, very well-to-do, if not in the royal lineage of their particular country in their particular time. Yet they were examples because they had the order correct. God was first, and then they served others. Everything else falls into place. And I think at the root of it, they don't get that. But outside of prayer, John, what can we do? I mean, clearly praying is very important. We arm ourselves with prayer. The rosary is very important. I think it's also important that we vote. It's also important to be informed. Too many people aren't informed. What are some other things that we can do?
Yeah, I think it also has to do with having the right principles to defend those right principles. If you, as the other Joe said, the minute you leave the church and go on to their narrative, you've already given up half the ground.
Yeah.
And so don't follow their narrative. And I think that's one of the things that really has harmed a lot of these efforts. They'll say, oh, St. Louis, yes, he was good, he helped the poor, but yeah, he wasn't so nice to the Islams, and he didn't do this, and he did. Well, you're already giving up. You're already saying, well, this man really wasn't a saint. He has his, you've bought into their narrative, and so I think we need to not bear into their narrative and to stand up for our principles, stand up for them very strongly, and not be afraid to do so. St. Louis, he was very much that way. He was not a pushover. He was willing to give up, when he was negotiating with others for the peace. But if something really, was at stake, he would go to war for it. He would fight for it. He even there was one point where the Vatican was saying, well, was interfering in something temporal and threatened to excommunicate him. And he stood his ground. He said, no, I'm right. And they actually found, they actually looked it over and said, you are right. And they backed down because he was not afraid to stand for his principles. And I think that's what we need to do, is not be afraid to stand for our principles and not follow their narratives.
I think it's funny because you say, I'm right. Sadly, because of relativism, people don't know what right is anymore.
Right. Yeah.
There is an absolute. 2 + 2 is 4. And that has something to do with prayer. When you are praying, when you're in a state of grace, you're going to confession, you're receiving the Eucharist, there's instilled wisdom. You see, people who haven't encountered Christ, and I say that even Catholics who haven't encountered Christ, there could be an uneducated person who lives in a garden apartment in the middle of North Dakota, and they could have wisdom that someone who went to Yale would not have.
Right.
It's instilled. It's one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. God enlightens you. Someone who's secular would hear my voice and they probably laugh at me, but it's true. There are very wise people, simple people who see things correctly. And I think that's a big part of it. That's why St. Louis, when speaking to the Vatican in that particular time, he said, no, I'm right. I'm right. You know, like, again, many times I scour my conscience. I say to myself, am I doing the right thing with regard to this show, with some of the things that I say? I really do. But it's important that we do that. Not just to go to formal confession, but at the end of every day, say, what did I do right today? And what did I do wrong? You see, and I don't determine it. Sadly,
Joe,
we're at a point.
that requires a certain amount of humility, Joe, that you're not going to find in a lot of people. I'm not just saying that about you, but when you look at, let's say right now, our enemies, and they are our enemies. We didn't make it that way. They did. Okay. And we're trying to figure out ways that we could, peacefully engage and overcome them. But Joe, the difference is there's a matter of bending the knee. Now, these people, they'll bend the knee in a very secular way of what you see in Major League Baseball and stuff like that. They're not bending the knee to the one that they're supposed to be. And that requires humility that, Joe, I think you would agree, that's lacking. They just don't have it. They think they're this small group of people. And again, this is not a very large group of people. The problem is you do have a large group of people who are afraid to be called names. They're being bullied. Okay, just these CEOs, you mentioned Jeff Bezos, like CEOs of corporations, they just give them everything they want. But at the end of the day, you have a very small group of people who refuse to bend the knee. They're full of rage, mostly against Jesus Christ. I mean, we never did anything to them, but they certainly know who Christ is. I think they reject the moral order. They reject the natural law. They reject, as John wrote, return to order, authentic Christian society. They reject that whole idea. These are revolutionaries. They are full of hate and they lack all humility, Joe. So I just wanted to point that out.
I think that's a very good point. A lot of people think that the other side is motivated by money and power, and that's all. But there is that hatred aspect of it that you need to understand, because money alone does not explain what the actions of so many of these people, because many times they lose money supporting their leftist cause. Many times their own self-interest is sacrificed. There is this rage, there is this hatred that definitely is part of the equation and a major part of that.
Look at Michael Bloomberg. He spent $500 million supporting nonsense. I mean, we haven't heard his voice since he, left the stage, the presidential stage. $500 million. You want to make an impact on society? How about you educate people with $500 million? You can educate a city of high school graduates with $500 million, maybe for generations. It's misguided. And again, I think the gaze of society is off. And I think the only thing, this is my opinion, prayer is important because prayer is transforming. It transforms you. But the goal is for us to be transformed. Benedict XVI said this, and I think he's spot on. He's a very holy man, and I actually think one day he'll be declared a saint. He said, only saints change the world. I think that's very important because sadly, from a Catholic perspective, and we're all Catholic men here having this conversation, we have to be transformed. Men don't listen, sadly. They see. They have to see the fruit of the faith. That's, to be honest with you, why I'm sitting here today, why I go to church. I'm the first to say that there are problems in the Catholic Church. There are many problems in the Catholic Church. I'm a realist. I'll have that conversation and I'll have it objectively. However, I have also seen the fruit of the church when it's operating on all cylinders. And when it is, it stops traffic. You see, we have to return to that. We must be that. You see, that's what I think society has to see. They have to see families operating properly, husband and wife serving one another for the good of the children. They have to see people sharing the fruit of their labor. They have to see the joy of a faith well lived, a good life, the fruit of a good life, whether you're King Louis or whether, again, you clean the street. There are many people all in between that you see the fruit of it, where someone says, gosh, why is this person so joyful? Gosh, why does their life work? And mine seems to not. You see, this is what we need. We need to be transformed as a society, and people have to see it. You see, that's where I think will impact society the most, but that begins with prayer. The rosary is it's transformative. It begins with the sacraments. People have to see it to believe it. And I sadly, I think there's too few people out there who are doing that. I mean, you look at saints in our own lifetime, well, maybe not our lifetime, the last 100 years. Look what Padre Pio did. Look what Mother Teresa did. They impacted the world from little corners of the world. Why can't we do that? It's all there. It's all there. And I think that's what we have to get serious about as Catholic men, particularly. We have to transform ourselves. Proclamation of the kingdom of God in the luminous mystery. We transform ourselves to then transform our family, to then transform the community, to then transform the greater nation. And I think that's something that St. Louis understood. He was a Catholic man first, then he was a king. Because ultimately, John, we're all going to die. I recently went to a funeral, a friend of mine, very successful people. His father passed. And when I mean successful, extremely successful people. And I said to myself, I'm 50 years old, and the group that I was with, around the same age, we're more than halfway done. You could take that money and flush it down the toilet. At the Mass, nobody went up to receive the Eucharist, like 5 people. I say to myself, you got everything right, but you're missing this. If you're not in communion with God, you think you're going to heaven? It doesn't work that way. I mean, I'm saying that objectively. We're not geared as our society. We've just lost our way. And that's why John's book, Return to Order, is very important, because it addresses the structure of society. I know I'm ranting, but these are things that I see, and I can't believe it.
I was just thinking when you're talking about that, I mean, St. Louis was a good example of that, because he was a man. He was manly. He stood up for his principles. He was pious. His mother told him that she would rather see him dead than commit a mortal sin. And one of the interesting things about his realm, his reign, was the fact that it was extremely prosperous. He was the first medieval monarch to mint gold. There was no gold minted at that time, and his coins were so beautiful that that people kept them. They're one of the most common coins you find these days. You could find in French coinage, because people kept them because they're beautiful, and they reminded them of him. They didn't spend them over time. And the coinage was extremely. It was a very, very prosperous realm that he did. So that when you have your priorities and your focus on God and the Church, it works. Not only just from the point of view, a spiritual point of view, but materially as well.
John, let me ask you this, just to talk about the enemy a little bit more, if we might. Why? This is going to sound a little crazy to our viewers, but we want to ask: why are there either, I guess you would call them occultists or Satanists, or quite frankly, witches, like self-identified? We are not calling them that, okay? Why are they involved in this, not just this toppling of King St. Louis, but in iconoclasm in general, a lot of the problems we're seeing? Where do witches play a part in all this, and why?
Yeah, I mean, you see that now, that there are witches involved in the protests and the riots, and they're very open about it. It's become very almost trendy. There are even books that are spells for political causes, how to use witchcraft in politics. Magic and politics is coming together, and it's something that hasn't happened before, at least so openly. And I think it's largely because as the left radicalizes, it goes toward the final radical point of Satan. Satan is the greatest evil, and it's showing. They don't want to hide it anymore, and they need to put this in front. So yeah, I think it's a radicalization of the left, and it's a natural consequence, because it will lead to Satan, just as our radicalization should lead to God.
Yeah. Joe, did you have any other questions for John?
I guess to just put a finer point on the conversation, what could we just like if we say very briefly, how could we draw inspiration from St. Louis if we read into his life? Just as three men, Catholic men, how could we get inspiration directly from this great example?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of things that can inspire us about him. We can be inspired by his piety because he was a pious man in all that he did. Um, we can be inspired by his manliness. I think that is also very attractive for Catholic men because he practiced his faith. He was a crusader. He went out. He acted, on that. And we can be inspired by his justice. I mean, he was a man of incredible justice. He sent officials out throughout his whole kingdom, and because he wanted to go before God, saying, "I did not defraud anyone." And he asked the people, saying, "Do you have a complaint against me or my ancestor or my administration? If you do, you can register these complaints, and I'll make them good." I mean, what political leader does that today? I mean, nobody does that today. But he loved justice so much that he went looking for justice. He went looking for those who might have a complaint against his justice. He was so just that when he was captured in the First Crusade by the Egyptians, and the Egyptians would bring their cases to him for him to judge because they trusted his judgment and not their own. And he was a Catholic, but they trusted his judgment more than his own. So he was a man of immense justice. I think we should admire that and be inspired by that.
All right. So, John, did you have any final comments?
No, I mean, I think we just need to keep up the fight. I did want to mention the petition. We do have the petition going. It's 53,000 right now. The counter petition, I think, is getting close to 1,000 of the Muslims that put a counter petition, but we have 53,000. Awesome. So we want to get that up to 100. So if anything you can do to help that along, I'm sure you'll put it in the show.
Petition, John? Where can people find that petition? Online?
They can find it online. I think the best way to do that is to Google TFP St. Louis petition. It'll go right there. I mean, I could give you a URL, but it's hard to find
No, John, I'll find it. I'll link to it.
You'll find it and put it on the show notes.
I absolutely will. I'll put it on our Facebook page and our YouTube page. Speaking of which, please, all you good people out there, follow the Front Line with Joe and Joe on both Facebook and YouTube. Like, subscribe, share, especially since we get great guests like John Horvat come on and talk about iconoclasm in St. Louis. And speaking of John Horvat, Joe and I, we say every time John comes on, we encourage you to get his book, Return to Order: From a Frenzied Economy to an Organic Christian Society. Remember, John's been on Fox News, Wall Street Journal. John's all over the place, and he's fighting the good fight. We're all soldiers in this culture war. We're all praying, looking to God, and trying to be the men that we're supposed to be, particularly in America, particularly in the face of everything that we're fighting against right now. So everybody out there, keep the faith, okay? And join with others. Find out if there's, threats of, protests, especially against Catholic icons, statues of Jesus, Mary. Sign the petition in St. Louis. Just fight the good fight. And so we'll leave it there. And remember that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. So we'll see you next time.